Officials tell us the Philadelphia 76ers will abandon the team's plans to build an arena in Center City and stay put in South Philadelphia.
The word that 76 Place would be scrapped was met with widespread relief in Chinatown. That neighborhood that would have bordered the planned Center City arena was unified in their opposition to the plan.
When it was announced in January 2025 that the arena would not be built in Center City, and that instead the Sixers would remain in South Philly, where they could collaborate with Comcast to build a new arena, activists and Center City residents were mostly relieved. But Market East's future remained an open question. How would the city take steps to revitalize this corridor, particularly after it had been announced just a month earlier that Macy's, the final legacy department store holdout in the neighborhood in the former Wanamaker's building, would also be shuttering?
Well, this is it. Sunday evening at closing time will be the last times Macy's in Center City closes.
A once very popular Center City destination is soon to mark the end of an era. The Macy's in the historic Wanamaker building is closing for good this weekend. Shoppers are lining up now to get one last.
I'm Emily Holloway, and you're listening to UAR Remixed, a podcast companion to the journal Urban Affairs Review. In this 4-part miniseries, we're exploring the trajectory of the contested and ultimately abandoned Sixers Arena project on Market Street in Center City, Philadelphia. In this final episode, we're exploring the future of Market East in the wake of the abandoned arena project and taking a closer look at the aspirations for the South Philadelphia Stadium complex. In episode 2, I spoke with several experts in the economics of sports to get a better sense of how different kinds of incentives, like tax subsidies, actually end up functioning in the public realm. Here's J.C. Bradbury, a professor of economics at Kennesaw State University near Atlanta, Georgia.
So I think one of the sort of difficult things when thinking about something like a sports event or an arena is that everyone understands what it's like to go to an event and the joy of it all. But when you start talking about the financials of it, they don't make a lot of sense. Most of us don't deal on a daily basis with millions of dollars, much less billions of dollars that it often takes to build this. So when you say, well, this is going to cost you $1 billion, it's a big city. I don't know how much that is, and trying to break it down on a personal level is sometimes difficult to do. And so I think that's one of the things that people don't realize.
During the City Hall press conference in January, when Mayor Parker announced that the Center City plan would not be moving forward, she also gathered several of the local professional sports teams owners to tease a blueprint for South Philly's stadium district, the Atlanta Braves Battery, a mixed-use development that surrounds the new Braves baseball stadium in Cobb County, just outside of Atlanta. Touting restaurants, retail, hotels, even multifamily housing, the Battery has been touted by team owners as the model for the future of professional sports, wherein team ownership diversifies through a real estate development that can supplement traditional revenue streams like ticket sales, merchandise, and broadcasting.
What's the owner of the Braves that you had lead that tour, you and Comcast? What's his name, bro?
Terry McGurk.
Terry McGurk. That Battery you've been hearing me whisper about is potentially a possibility.
This looks like an instant hit. Look at all these people. A feature the Braves say makes this new ballpark one of a kind.
Not only will our city soon be host to the best ballpark in the country, it'll be connected to the Battery Atlanta, the South's preeminent lifestyle destination and the first complex of its kind in professional sports.
But is this actually a good model for cities seeking broad-based revitalization? I spoke with JC about the Battery and his insights into the actual outcomes of this development for taxpayers in and around Atlanta.
First thing is to understand the location of the Battery. It's often touted as being in the suburbs. But the reality is that the mailing address of Truist Park is actually Atlanta. It's right over the border. So it's barely outside the jurisdiction of Atlanta. It is in Cobb County. I think it's not wrong to call it a suburb, but it certainly is very close to the center of the city. So a lot of people don't understand that. They think it's way out, and it really isn't. It's really sort of a part of Atlanta proper, which is very much a car-centric culture, and a lot of people live in the suburbs. And Atlanta as a city itself is actually quite small. It's only about 500,000 residents, but the Atlanta MSA is about 6 million people. So it's a top 10 MSA, but it's not, as a city, Atlanta is somewhat small. And so when you think about what the Battery is, it was touted as sort of this mixed use development success. And we're not just going to have a stadium. but we're going to have shops and restaurants, and people are going to come here. It's going to be a destination 365 days a year. And it all sounds very nice and it all sounds very new, but in fact, it's been tried over and over again. People don't realize that mixed use developments around stadiums actually go back. You could go back and look at in St. Louis when I want to say it was the St. Louis Browns had a racetrack and a honky tonk attached to their club in the 1800s, and it didn't succeed. But even more recent developments, you look the Houston Astrodome, which no longer it's still there, but it doesn't exist as a functioning venue, was built as part of the larger Astrodome. It had an amusement park, shopping mall, hotel attached to it. Mixed use developments around stadium developments are not new, and they're also not a panacea for the reason why stadiums don't succeed economically. So typically the reason why stadiums don't succeed economically is that it's just a transfer of wealth within the community. People spend their money at the stadium going to games instead of spending it elsewhere in the communities, restaurants, bars, movies. But building a district around the stadium doesn't change the basic economics of it. So you might say, well, instead of going to a restaurant somewhere else in the community, I go to a restaurant down at the Battery. You might say, oh, look, it's rich. Look how much richer we are because I'm not just going to the stadium and going to the Battery. But you're also not going to another restaurant within Cobb County. And so it's simply just a transfer of resource. So it actually isn't this sort of huge revenue generator. And theoretically, we don't think it should be. But what we can do is we can actually look at it empirically. And so what I've done is that I've used empirical techniques to examine how sales tax receipts have changed within Cobb County. I've also looked at property values as well to see how we saw them increase after the Braves Stadium open. And the nice thing about having it in a different jurisdiction is that we can actually say, okay, there are people who were going to Turner Field down in downtown Atlanta who are now going to Truist Park in Cobb County. So we should see sales tax receipts predictably increase. And it's somewhat complicated, but at the end of the day, when I do this, what I find, so the original cost to the county was $300 million, and that understates some other things that were being spent. It's often misstated as 400 million because they double count some bonds, but it's really about 300 million. And when you look at the amount that is paid back from extra tax receipts, it's not enough to cover the cost of the bonds. And so if you look at the cost at the county level, it's about it's about $15 million a year deficit is what Cobb County is running to support that $300 million and other costs associated with operating the Braves. And if you want to, and again, I like to often point out these big numbers. What does $15 million mean to most people? That doesn't sound like much, but it's about $50 a year per household, per Cobb household, and for the next 30 years. So if you want to think about this, would you be willing to pay $50 a year in greater taxes for your whole household to justify this? Now, I'm a big baseball fan. $50 a year for me, that's it's like a Costco membership, right? Okay, I like going to Costco, I like going to Braves. But every single household in Cobb is paying that. Even people who don't like baseball, who don't follow it, end up paying that. So it's definitely a net physical loser. And sometimes people will say, oh, you're using the wrong numbers. I'm literally using the exact same numbers put out by the county and the team on an annual basis. They didn't realize that someone would actually look at these numbers and see what they meant. But when you actually look at the influx of revenue from the team, there actually is some positive influx of spending, which isn't surprising, but it's very small and not enough to cover the deficit. And so in a place like Philadelphia says, oh, we want to be like the Battery. It's been a model of success. As a public finance project, it has not been a success. Who it has been a success for is the Atlanta Braves. And so a neat thing about the Atlanta Braves is that it's a publicly traded company. So they have to put out financial documents that show how much their financial statements have changed. And basically, they've seen a 10% increase in revenue, which is huge for that company. And so they're very happy about it. And I'm sure that all the teams in Philadelphia that want one of these mixed use developments are happy to have the increased revenue. But the question is, how much are taxpayers giving to it? And I don't know enough about what the tax situation might be there. Oftentimes you'll see a stadium pitched as, oh, it's totally private. And then they'll say, oh, but we're going to collect tax revenue from the district around it. So it's not really a tax. Well, it is a tax. And so you do have to count that. So we'll see what the financial situation will be in the future.
The Philadelphia Stadium District is actually pretty unique. All of the city's major sports franchises, except for the professional soccer team, are located within walking distance of each other in a 227-acre lot, 60% of which is dedicated to surface-level parking. It's very easily accessible from I-95, the airport is less than 15 minutes away, and there's also a convenient public transit stop for the L. But it's not really isolated from the city. There's densely populated neighborhoods surrounding the sports complex, as well as major city roads. Here's Joel Maxey, a professor at Drexel University.
As far as I know, it is the only one that has all three in one place like that. Not suburban, but also not quite in the center city either. So I think to me, with just some like casual observations, it's good because it eliminates a lot of those negative externalities. So people can get there without traveling too far, but they're far enough away from the residential areas of the city so that the noise, they certainly haven't completely eliminated the traffic issues and those sorts of things but they do with the subway stop down there. They have made it has a pretty good effort so that they probably minimize it as much as possible. So to me, it does solve a lot of those negative externality problems that you would get if you put it in center city, and the same sort of problems if you go out in the suburbs where it's hard to get to and a long way to get to that a lot of other places have done. So to me, centering them there is a good model. I mean, as models of stadium complexes go, I think it's good. I think they had, one time 10 or 15 years ago, they had bigger designs that this would become sort of a Philly Live entertainment area like LA Live in Los Angeles, and that hasn't come to be yet. And I don't know if that's feasible or if that's even desirable, but and I don't think really stadiums, even if you have them all as a complex, are the economic driver that people sometimes would like to think they are. Doesn't mean that they, certainly a lot of economic activity happens there, but I don't know that we're going to pave our streets in gold here if we have an even bigger development down there. I was going to add this too. When the previous mayor, I'm drawing a blank on it, Jim Kenney, spoke to one of our classes, I'm going to say before the pandemic, like maybe 2019 or so, and we asked him about that. And he said that when he was on city council, so he was on the city council at the time they were developing the Link and Citizens Bank Park, early 2000s. And he said that most of the objections to the stadium complex being further developed at that time came from those residents that were fairly near. So there's that part of South Philly that's somewhat close, but not exactly close. So even with the separation that's there are concerns by people that live right next door. I think they're kind of like airports. Like we need them, we have to have them, but if you live near it, it's not necessarily the best thing. And so to me, putting all the stadiums in one place is it at least minimizes the number of people who are adversely affected.
We talked a lot about negative externalities in our second episode. Stadiums and arenas have a lot of negative externalities. Traffic, the need for plentiful parking, noise, inconsiderate fans, the total lack of activity on non-game days. J.C. Bradbury again.
But let's think about that traffic externality and what it is. It is absolutely something that is a serious consideration. If you live near a venue or there's a hospital near a venue or there are businesses near it, it actually has huge detrimental effects. And where you can see that is actually right here in Atlanta. If you go and look where Turner Field was in Atlanta, in downtown Atlanta, and before that, it had Atlanta Fulton County Stadium. So basically for 50 years, you had a neighborhood that had two stadiums dropped in it, and they were sort of vast wastelands of poverty. There was a very good summary of what it was like down there that was written about 2013, about the time the Braves announced they were leaving, in Atlanta Magazine. by a prominent Atlanta journalist. But the reason I mention it, you can go and find this online, and she talks about all the problems that residents have to deal with: traffic, people coming in and out, leaving trash. But also, when you have a stadium, not only do you have the disruption, but the most valuable use for land becomes parking lots. Parking lots are extremely lucrative. And so you don't want to build a new business because that's a valuable spot you could have for parking lot for games. And also, certain types of businesses don't like to open up near stadiums. So you don't want to have a grocery store near a stadium because, you might say, oh, well, it's good. We have a baseball game, 81 games a year, but that's 81 days that the local supermarket pretty much has to shut down. So they don't want to locate near that. Doctor's offices, retail stores, they don't want to be near stadiums. So if you go down to where Turner Field was now, and it's still there, it serves as a host for Georgia State football, which hosts 6 to 8 football games a year on the weekend, and it has very few people go to those games. So it's basically just a wasteland of the stadium itself. But that area has completely blossomed into one of the coolest new neighborhoods in Atlanta. All sorts of bars and restaurants, and I'm talking boutique, neat places, doctor's offices. There's a grocery store that's opened up. There's several new apartment complexes down there. That is the place to go in Atlanta now that the team has left. You don't have people traipsing through your yard while tailgating, getting in alcohol-fueled altercations. And so that's a real problem with stadiums. And I will say that one of the unique things about Philadelphia, and again, I'm not a local, so I can't speak to it, but you sort of mentioned this, is that its design is such where most of its stadiums are all there together. And so it keeps sort of, hey, when we're not having a baseball game, we can have a football game, a basketball game. And those types of people who are coming in and eating and drinking at bars and restaurants can do that. And so it's actually not so disruptive. You don't need grocery stores. You don't need people living down there. So it's actually, why don't we concentrate that externality here? It's kind of like, why don't we put the dump on the outskirts of town? And I don't mean to liken these sports facilities to dumps, but let's keep the externalities in one place. And it's a much better model than trying to integrate it into the center of the city, where it's going to disrupt so many other things. And so I think that may be an asset that Philly has in the way its sports arenas and stadiums are allocated.
The plans for South Philly haven't been finalized yet. There are opportunities there to improve pedestrian access, to create more green space around the complex, and hopefully improve public transit accessibility to cut down on the enormous amount of traffic that clogs up this neighborhood a few nights every week. Public transportation also emerged as a major element in the Center City negotiations. Remember, the Sixers were planning to build right over the Jefferson SEPTA station on Market East, which is an important transit hub. But SEPTA, which serves the southeastern PA region and connects the city to the 4 collar counties and even New Jersey, has been struggling with significant budget crises that were exacerbated by the pandemic. During the negotiations over the Center City plan, the Sixers were adamant about 2 things. First, that an estimated 60% of game attendees would use public transportation, and second, that they would not be providing any kind of financial support to SEPTA to make the badly needed upgrades or increase game day service. This became a major impasse in negotiations, but it also made clear that any kind of development on Market East would have to leverage and support the robust public transit infrastructure that already exists there.
My name is Jody Holton. I'm the Chief Planning and Strategy Officer at SEPTA.
I talk with Jody about the current landscape of public transit on Market East and about the importance of Jefferson Station.
Jefferson Station is one of our busiest downtown stations on our regional rail network. We have a number of trains, about 600 trains a day that stop at that station. We have a number of riders, about 17,000 riders that board and alight there. It's a busy station. It's right next to the convention center. It was planned as a station. It's our newest downtown station because of the Center City commuter rail connection that was built in the 1970s, late 70s, early 80s that connected our 2 rail systems together. So the Reading Company and the Pennsylvania Railroad had not been connected until that time. So it made for this, at the time, very modern station. It has access to daylight. It has a very open, several 2 to 3 stories inside that are open air above, which makes a great place to wait for the train and for our trains and our crews to help service the system.
SEPTA has made major improvements to the subway lines in Philadelphia, one of which runs the length of Market Street. There's so much tourism in Philly, and especially in that part of the city, right near Independence Mall, Penn's Landing. Can you talk a little bit about this process and how these kinds of projects help to catalyze or at least support economic development in these neighborhoods?
Well, a couple of years ago, we invested in the 5th Street station on the L. And the 5th Street station is one of the easiest ways to get to Independence Mall, especially if you're coming from 30th Street station or anywhere in Center City. Just hopping on the L and getting off at 5th Street is how you would access Independence Mall. So that station looks phenomenal. If you haven't been there, you should. Unfortunately, it opened during the pandemic, so maybe it hasn't gotten as much attention, but it is. We are very proud of that station and proud to have it for 2026, especially as we see more people come to this area. Market East has a lot of hotels on it. There are a lot of shops, so we get a lot of visitors on Market East. So we tend to see a lot of tourism, tourists in the area. There's the Marriott, the Lowe's, there's the new hotel on the Girard block between 11th and 12th. There's a number of apartments there as well. That type of tourism is important, and I think that's one of the reasons why we did do that wayfinding signage program, which will be rolling out in 2026 and 2027. There's a lot of, I would add, like Market East, I think we have a lot of traction in terms of there's a ton of transit. These developments have activated that 11th to 12th Street area on Market and on Chestnut. They show a lot of promise for what could be, especially in between 8th and 9th on Market on the south side. There's a big surface parking lot there that is ripe for development. I think that it's just going to take a significant amount of investment in the development, but I think that development proves that it's possible and that it's valuable. People want to be in this location. You have great access to transit, you have shopping, you have entertainment, you have the tourism area right there at Independence Mall, which is a nice big open space. So it's a very livable part of the city, and only has potential for being more.
So we're recording and producing this series in summer 2025, and right now, the state legislature has not yet produced a budget that will meet SEPTA's operating costs for the next fiscal year. Because the transit agency is legally obligated to maintain a balanced budget, they've already taken steps to start reducing and eventually eliminating some service, including 50 bus lines and 5 regional rail lines, completely. So what will the impact of this be?
Yeah, so 800,000 people a day ride SEPTA. And so it impacts a good portion of this region. And even if you're not on a SEPTA bus or train, it impacts the amount of congestion you experience on roads. So because of us, there's far fewer cars on the road, and even the worst congestion that we receive today or have today would be worse without SEPTA. So it's an important part of how this region grew up. So right now, the crisis is on the operating budget. It's the most acute problem that we have. We are short about $213 million. Our budget is about 2.6 billion. in total, 1.6 in our operating budget. And that's without that 213. That's with the gap. So $213 million is what we need. Most of our operating funding comes from the state, and then it is matched by our counties to the amount of about 15% on state dollars that come to us. The counties match 15%. So without that 213 million, we are looking at starting this July to plan for a reduction in service of 20% across all modes. And then in January in 2026, we would need to start eliminating some of our regional rail lines. We'd have to put a curfew on all rail at 9 p.m. So it's a tremendous impact to this region. We have a lot of information about how that affects our economy. I mentioned before, cars on the road, we estimate it would be about 250,000 more vehicles on the road. Over time, property value that has grown because it's near transit, the access that we provide, we would see about $20 billion in property value reduction because of the lack or the cut in the transit service and the elimination of some of those rail lines. So, and that's just the residential property value. The commercial value, which we're talking about on Market East for the most part, we didn't even it's very hard to estimate that. So, it's anybody's guess, but it is devastating to this region.
Activists from different communities in Center City weren't the only stakeholders trying to influence or, at the very least, participate in the arena planning process. In our first episode, you heard from Harris Steinberg, the executive director of the Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation at Drexel University, and a key figure behind the civic design process for the redevelopment of the Central Delaware waterfront more than 15 years ago. Harris and his team at Drexel lobbied for a more inclusive and civic-oriented approach to the Sixers Arena development in 2024, authoring a series of op-eds for the Philadelphia Inquirer and researching best practices in transit-oriented development.
It's kind of predicated on values derived from a civic conversation. So it would mean going out to different communities, calling the question about what they want for Market Street. If there's an arena coming, what are their concerns about it? Airing issues in a way that felt genuine and honest, not just checking the boxes around, we spoke to the public because we have to by legislation. So along the waterfront, this is back in 2006, 2007, when the casinos were kind of looming, tremendous amount of civic interest in participating in these public forums. We had, some nights where 800 people would come to be part of a process because they wanted their voice heard. So Market Street, I don't think, was going to be at that level of magnitude, but it still rose, I think, to that level of importance. And our goal would be to touch as many communities as possible with as honest a conversation as possible to surface values that could be used to then help frame planning principles for Market East. The other thing we would do, and this would all before you'd put any pen to paper, in terms of what a design might look like, is do deep best practices work. What have other cities done about downtown arenas? What have the impacts been? What are the cautionary tales? What are success stories? We'd look at Europe, we'd look at the United States. And that would be kind of part of the public education process. We felt like our goal, much like along the waterfront, was to, not only hear from folks about what their concerns were, but also to help educate the public about what was possible. And when I say public, that's the whole public. That's the political class. It's not just citizen groups, for instance. It's really about the city as a whole.
So from this kind of design angle and civic mindedness, what kinds of principles do planners and urban designers need to bear in mind? What makes a neighborhood resilient and dynamic?
I think so. And I think what we've done before is try not to get as bogged down in use and think more about the form of the city. So uses will change over time. You know, the big industrial uses are gone along the waterfront. But you'd want the urban form to still allow for the human scale development of the city to continue. That was always sort of the ethos that we were working under. You look at a building like the John Wanamaker building, which is over 1 million square feet, fills up a whole city block, and yet in its heyday, it enlivened the street with its shop windows and people coming in and out. It was not just blank walls down to the ground. So, we can do big buildings, we can do more, smaller buildings, but we have to have the mindset that whatever we do has to contribute to the positive life of the street, not take away from it. So could there be different uses? Yeah. But you want the ground floor and probably the couple of floors above it to be active uses that stimulate the vibrancy of the street life. It doesn't necessarily have to be a big chain restaurant. It's like what are the market's going to have to help us figure out like what's viable. But when it comes to form, I used to say, and forgive me if we've talked about this before, but William Penn laid out the grid of what is now Center City in 1682. We still walk those streets. We still the scale that was created by the 400 by 400 foot block that quickly got kind of gobbled up into smaller blocks still gives Philadelphia its character and its rhythms, and that Alfred's Alley, which has the tiny little houses down by the Delaware, sits on the same block structure that the Comcast Tower sits on. William Penn couldn't have imagined a 900-foot tower, at 17th and Arch, but it's a demonstration of if you get the basics right, you can put a lot of stuff in there that's going to change over time. 99% of the buildings we walk past, we don't know what's going on. Right? But if the sidewalk is clean, if there's street trees that I can get shade from, if there are benches to sit on, if there's a place I can get a cup of coffee, if there's people that are interesting to possibly bump into, that's what you care about. But you have to not be afraid to go there. And when there's no windows into buildings and it looks ominous and scary, you're not going to spend time on it.
Human scale development is a tough needle to thread for cities who want to get as large of an impact as they can with taxpayer dollars. But previous projects along Market East, we talked early on about the large department stores, then the gallery, now the fashion district, the proposals for different casinos, Disney Quest, the Phillies Stadium, the Sixers Arena. Maybe smaller scale is the right direction to take. I polled all of our guests about their visions for Market East. Here's Dr. Bill King.
And so what Market East, I think what it is great as a hub of hubs. That area is a great place for people to come to get educated, for people to come to learn about the cultural activities. Chinatown is right there. You have access to all these the Constitution Center, City Hall. So I think that whole gallery mall could be a place where like say tourists can come in and it would be like, welcome to the Please Touch Museum. Welcome to Chinatown. Welcome to the Constitution Center is this way. The African American Cultural Association is this way. Kind of like a little mini Epcot Center. And it would point you towards sports this way. It would point you towards the Italian market that way. It would point you towards, and that kind of thing, see where people come up and then disperse. Right. So that's what that's what Times Square is, right? You don't come up and stay there. You come up and disperse. And so you could make it into kind of an interest point where there's different little mini events. And then I also think that this is a great place to actually train and teach. Like you could because Jefferson is right there. Penn, with the Pennsylvania hospital system's right there. Temple is just almost right there. And so you have the major health centers right there. But I think it could also be a great health training hub where allied health and some of those kinds of professions, you could actually get some of these kids, young people, high school graduates, and CCP is right there. So I think a hub for educational access, a hub for tourism access, like to really and cultural access. I think it would be a great cultural access point too, because right now the hubs, that's, what do you mean, Independence Hall? That's not a hub, that's history. We're talking about the present and the future. So I think that's what she should do. I don't think you can make it a retail hub. People aren't coming to shop. They're coming for information.
And Dr. Randall Drain.
I grew up in Philadelphia. I've been in Philadelphia most of my life. And it does sadden me when I walk through the area even now, because I think it has so much hidden potential. And, I see some shops closed up on the east side of Chestnut Street and Market Street. And it's just, wow, this doesn't make sense for a city like Philadelphia, an inner city like Philadelphia, because there's so much potential here. And I'm not privy to all the decisions that were made to create Market East, but I do think, looking to the future, I think some of the ideas that are being generated, and I agree with them, is number one, to try to create more opportunities for small businesses in that space and open it up more, so it doesn't feel like a mall per se. Maybe more the flavor of Reading Terminal, maybe not as congested, but just, more that flavor where you have small businesses able to, lease space for reasonable fees. And it would also highlight kind of the diversity of Philadelphia, I think, in doing that. And I think it would work, because I think you do have a model already, like Reading Terminal is like that. And it grew up, I've seen that grow over the years. Also, what I'd like to see in that area is like truly affordable housing, which, I know that's kind of, maybe that's not even the right term to use, but I know that's a very hot issue. Politically charged issue, but I would like to see some housing in that area for people that actually work there or live there, which, is becoming more and more challenging, because even at my church, which is in that area, some of the students live in that area, but they say, the rents are at times, they can be prohibitive, so a lot of times they're, 2 or 3 of them are living together and that sort of thing. So I think housing, small business, more access to small business, and it's difficult in that area, but I mean, it would be very nice if there was some, green space created, in that area as well. Because when you go down there now, especially if you go at night, especially around the convention center and everything, it seems sort of almost ominous, when you're walking through that area. So I'm not sure what would make that better. Maybe just lighting would help too. But I see Market East as potentially being like a window to Chinatown, as well as the other areas, Gayborhood and Washington Square. It should just be like almost like a shining light in that area, where people can come, but also you're also encouraged to see some of these smaller communities that are around there.
Dr. Walter Tsu?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I mean, if you think about East Market Street is the historical area of Philadelphia. And it's, it's the heart of Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell and so on. And it goes all the way up to the Wanamaker building, which now actually has a chance to reinvent itself. Let's suppose we put, let's say, the Philadelphia Historical Museum, the former Atwater Kent Museum, in the Wanamaker building. I know that they want to make apartments on the top, which is fine. They can do that. But they're going to preserve the organ. And if I were living in that building, I'm not sure if I'd want to be in a building that actually played the organ all the time. But that's not my problem. But think about each of those floors being a place where you could exhibit the historical beauty of what Philadelphia is, all those wonderful things that we've collected at the Atwater Kent Museum. What about, showing off some of the wonderful artwork that we have in our city that could be in that building also? And then, let it be one of those places where it begins right next to City Hall. You can do the City Hall tour and then move your way historically down Market Street to Independence Hall. The problem with the Market Street historical area around Independence Hall is that after 5 o'clock, the whole place closes up. All these federal buildings are there, the courthouse and the public ledger building and so on. And at 5 o'clock, they want to go home. So they go home and the whole place becomes like a giant dead zone. If you go to Europe and you see how they look at some of their historical squares, they treat them very differently. They're, for example, the nidus of, the Christmas market. I mean, we have our Christmas market in sort of overcrowded, I think, in City Hall area. Why don't we have a second Christmas market? We can have it right there in Independence Mall. You don't have to tear down any buildings. Just set it up in the winter time around the mall and then take it down after Christmas. And at least you have this great tourist season during the summer, spring and summer and fall. And then during the winter, we have the Christmas market. And we do it in a way that really shows off maybe many of the historical features of the city itself. If we get, it's right now, it's a dead zone. Nobody wants to go down there. And, we need to have, I think, more use of the mall as a place for public dissent, protests, activism. It's a place where free speech has to be considered something that all of us treasure, so that all of us, should value that area as a place where people can speak out about whatever topics are going on. And there's a lot of topics right now.
I also asked Mohan Seshadri about what he and other organizers and community members in Chinatown were thinking about for the neighborhood.
We've been working on both creating an alternate vision for Market East, but then ensuring that the right people are at the table for the first time, and that is a right size for the area. I think more than anything else, for me, as someone who is not an urban planner, who is not a design expert, who had to learn what mixed use development was for the first time with this campaign, the process is as important than the outcome. And the way in which local RCOs, residential registered community organizations, the way local neighborhoods, the way local institutions and leaders were either given just lip service but no real voice in this process, or worse, actively silenced, by the lack of language access, or by just the PR, assault on our community and the lobbying against us. The way so many people, not just in Chinatown, but in the neighborhood, in Wash West, of small businesses all along Market East, Old City, etc., were so ignored throughout the process. That is something that needs to be done differently. And I have a lot of faith that if you get the community together with the right folks, with the right experts, with the right people who are ready to listen to the community and ready to think not just about a project that can make as much money as possible for a couple people who already have so much money, but is actually the right size for the local economies, will support the local economy, will support and reinvest resources into local communities and residents. That, I think, is the most important thing for me in terms of a vision moving forward. That this can be an area that we do revitalize in a way that supports the neighborhoods north and south of it, in addition to attracting folks from all across the city. But that answer is not found in a group of people whose orientation towards it is purely profit driven at the expense of everything else, but is instead found in conversation and compromise between folks who have that profit motive and people and communities that are just trying to survive and thrive in areas where they and their families have lived for over 100 years.
The future of Market East is still uncertain. The Sixers and Comcast announced that they're still committing investments in the neighborhood, despite keeping the arena in South Philly. How these dynamics all played out, the resistance from Chinatown, from the medical community, from the neighborhood, and more broadly from people across the region, along with the private negotiations between the biggest power players, it's still unclear what the tipping point was. But the takeaways for everyday Philadelphians who want to take a bigger role in their city's future are less ambiguous. I asked Vivian Chang of AAU what she hopes people will take away from this experience.
I've been part of so many struggles for so many years. So, it's like we didn't even talk as much about like the federal prison that was slated for Chinatown, the convention center, and it was, some of that we intentionally didn't do because we were just like, if we start listing all the things that have like hit this neighborhood, people are like, all right, I got it. But it's like literally what people say is like every 5 or 10 years, there's a project that's coming for Chinatown. So I think something we'd love to make happen is just like no more. Everyone feels it was like a sword dangling over the head of Chinatown for so long. And a lot of people were really scared, like I think Wonder Spaces, there was like some tenant in the fashion district didn't renew their lease because they thought it was about to be destroyed. And it's like, that's not Chinatown business, but I was like, wow, people would literally just give up that early. So like that can really do a lot of psychic damage to a community. And a lot of our youth, like their mental health suffered. So I think for folks to consider, like these decisions are not at all like limited in their impact. Like we already know it's like, gentrification, like that is, somewhat getting some discussion. But like when you think about like, okay, a community's very existence is under threat. And what does that do to how people think about their future or are really able not to? I think that's something to consider. For AU, it's like, a lot of times what folks have said is like every fight AU threw it all on the line and then, we're like scraped and bloodied for a while. But we're hopeful that this time this can like build things up. So like, so many great people came in with like Black Philly for Chinatown, No Arena Philly medical workers. So it's like, there's so many of these like unlikely coalitions and people are using those to like advance other issues in the city. So what we're hopeful is like to keep building on that work and like activating like all these like hundreds, thousands of people and like, really, really reshape this because it's like, it already has come for so many communities, it's like the stadium stompers at Temple face off against their own sports stadium, literally like so few years ago. There's a lot of great exchange there. And it's like, it's gonna happen again and again unless we change this city and unless we change the way power shows up. So, invite all listeners to be part of that struggle.
You've been listening to UAR Remixed, a podcast by the journal Urban Affairs Review. Special thanks to Drexel University and the editors at UAR. Music is by Blue Dot Sessions. This show was mixed and produced by Aidan McLaughlin and written and produced by me, Emily Holloway. You can find us on Blue Sky at urbanaffairsreview.bluesky.social for updates on the journal and the show. Please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.